Sourdough baguettes are intimidating to make, but as long as you're not overly concerned with them being perfectly shaped or perfectly uniform, you can make baguettes that you're happy with. With a thin, crispy crust on the outside and a soft, fluffy interior, seriously anyone can make sourdough baguettes at home. My baguette recipe is a 65% hydration dough, so start out with a mixing bowl on your digital scale and add 275 grams of water to the mixing bowl. Next, you'll need your active and risen sourdough starter. This is a 100% hydration sourdough starter, so equal parts water and flour, that I fed 6 hours before in the evening, and by the morning it was doubled in size and ready to use. So add 100 grams of active and risen sourdough starter to your mixing bowl. Then get out some salt. I'm using kosher salt, and add 10 grams of salt to the mixing bowl. And then using a fork or a spoon, whisk up the starter and salt into the water just so everything dissolves. Now for the final part of the recipe, the flour. You're going to be using half all-purpose flour and half bread flour. So add 225 grams of all-purpose flour to the mixing bowl, and then add 225 grams of bread flour to the mixing bowl. Using a 50-50 blend of these flours will produce a baguette that's crispy on the outside and soft on the inside without being too chewy. Once all the ingredients are added to the bowl, stir everything up with a fork or a wooden spoon, and just bring the dough together until it's a nice cohesive dough. Once your dough is holding together like this, turn it out onto your unfloured kitchen counter, and you can start kneading. Knead the sourdough baguette dough by hand on the counter for about 8 minutes in total. Your goal with this kneading process is to transform a shaggy lump of dough into a smooth and strong ball of dough that holds together well and has a really strong gluten structure. So knead your dough for about 8 minutes by hand, and then it should be fairly smooth on the surface. If you notice your dough still isn't quite smooth at the end of 8 minutes, go ahead and just ball it up on the counter and cover it up with a mixing bowl and let it rest for 5 minutes at room temperature. Then when you come back, you should notice that your dough is already feeling smoother than it was before. So just knead your dough for about 1 more minute and you should be left with a fairly smooth ball of dough. Sometimes your dough just needs to rest for a little bit and then it will smooth out when you knead it again. So ball up your dough on the kitchen counter, and now it's time for the first rise or the bulk fermentation. For the first rise, I like to use a glass container with a lid. Glass because I like to see through the bowl to see how much my dough is rising, and a lid because it helps keep everything airtight and the dough doesn't dry out. Grease your bowl with just a little bit of olive oil, about a teaspoon or so. That'll just keep the dough from sticking. Then add your dough to the bowl, lightly flatten it, and close the lid. Then place your dough somewhere on your kitchen counter at room temperature and let it rise till it's about 1.5 times its original size. In my experience, if you let your sourdough baguette dough rise too much during the bulk fermentation stage, for example, if it gets to completely doubled in size, it will be too puffy and the baguettes will be hard to shape. So I like to let it rise to 1.5 times its original size during the first rise, and once it gets to that point, then I move on to the shaping step. So here's my dough 3 hours after it started rising. It's nice and puffy, it's gained a lot of volume, and it should be fairly nice to shape at this point. So to start out the shaping process, gently release the dough from the sides of the bowl. That should be fairly easy to do if you grease the bowl with a little bit of oil. Transfer the dough onto your kitchen counter and then gently pull on the edges of the dough to make the dough flat. I'm seeing nice signs of fermentation bubbles in this dough already. This recipe makes 4 half-size or demi baguettes, so cut your dough into 4 equally sized pieces. You can do this by eye like I do, just cut it into 4 pieces that look relatively similar, or you can weigh them out with a digital scale. If you want to weigh them out, each piece of dough should be roughly 208 grams each. Now it's time to pre-shape each of these dough balls into a slightly oblong tube. So dust the top of the dough with flour, then flip one piece over and start stretching and folding it like this. Grab an edge of the dough, stretch it up and fold it under your thumb and then hold it in place. Keep going around the dough, stretching and folding until you've got a ball of dough like this. And now you want to shape this ball into a slightly oblong tube. So just kind of roll it or tuck the edges under until the dough is oblong. Just like that. It's exactly what you're looking for. Since we're going to be rolling out our baguettes really long, it'll be easier to shape an oblong piece of dough into a baguette than a ball of dough. So repeat this same process with each of the pieces of dough, shaping them each into a slightly oblong tube. Then once the 4 pieces of dough have been pre-shaped, you can let them rest on your kitchen counter for 15 minutes at room temperature. This will give the pieces of dough time to relax, and they'll be easier to shape into the baguette shape later. Now, while your dough is resting for 15 minutes, time to get out some special equipment. Don't think you need a special couche or linen for your baguettes to proof on. As long as you have a kitchen towel with enough room for 4 10-inch baguettes, that's all you need. Heavily dust the kitchen towel with some bread flour or all-purpose flour in 10-inch strips. Once your baguettes are shaped, you'll lay them on top of the flour, and they'll proof on the kitchen towel without sticking. Then another piece of equipment that'll be nice to have is a baguette transfer peel that's long enough for a 10-inch baguette. You don't absolutely need this piece of equipment. You could use any other kind of flat piece of wood, even some cardboard, or a pizza peel would work really well here too. You just want something sturdy and flat that you can use to transfer the baguette dough from the kitchen towel onto your baking tray or your pizza stone. Speaking of that, I bake my baguettes on a 12-inch pizza steel or baking steel. You can bake your baguettes directly on a cookie sheet or metal baking tray, but for best results, I would use a baking steel or a pizza stone. They will transfer heat better into the dough and give your baguettes a better crust. These baguettes are also perfect to bake in the Challenger bread pan if you have one of those, because they are the perfect size, and it'll transfer heat just like a pizza stone. Okay, now that these doughs have relaxed and rested on the counter for 15 minutes, it's time to give them their final shape. Start by dusting a small portion of your kitchen counter with a little bit of bread flour or all-purpose flour, and then keep another section of your counter free from any flour. You want an unfloured part of the counter where you can actually roll out the baguettes. If you have too much flour on the counter, that will hinder you from rolling them out properly. Now take one of your oblong pieces of dough and then flip it over onto the flour. You want to get some flour dusted onto the top of the baguette. Then just brush the flour into the top of the baguette like so. Then flip the baguette over onto the clean part of your counter with the sticky side facing up. Next, fold the upper third of the dough over the middle third like this. Press it down so it sticks, and then spin your dough 180 degrees and do the same to the other side. Fold the top third of the dough over the middle third. Press the seam down. You should have a nice seam in the middle where the two ends of the dough meet. Now to build some surface tension into the top of the dough, grab an edge and stretch it all the way to the bottom. Press it into the bottom of the dough, pressing firmly into the counter to seal it. Repeat that process all through the length of the dough until you've got a nice tight seam on the bottom of the dough. Now it's time to roll out the baguette. So flip it over so the smooth side is facing up and the seam side is facing down against the clean, unfloured part of your kitchen counter. Press down against the dough lightly with your hands to apply pressure, and then rock it back and forth over and over again, slowly rolling out the dough into a 10-inch log. Try to complete this rolling process as quickly as you can in as few rolls as you can, but keep going until you've got a full 10-inch baguette. And feel free to press even harder on the edges to get slightly tapered edges, but that is also optional. There you go. Once you've rolled out your baguette, try to find the seam on the underside. Once you find the seam, it'll be easier to know which side is up and which side is down. So transfer your baguette onto your flour-dusted kitchen towel with the seam side facing up and the smoother side facing down against the flour. The smooth side is going to be the top of the baguette, and the seam side is going to be the bottom. Now repeat that shaping and rolling process with all 4 of the sourdough baguette doughs, and then transfer each piece of dough onto a floured part of the kitchen towel. Then pull up on the kitchen towel in between each of the baguettes. This will push each of the baguettes up against each other. You'll want them resting snugly against each other so that they rise up instead of out during the final proof. Speaking of the final proof, cover up your baguettes with another kitchen towel and let them rise at room temperature for 1 to 1.5 hours. You're just looking for them to increase in volume by about 50%. Then 30 minutes before your doughs have finished proofing, preheat your oven to 500 degrees Fahrenheit, or if your oven doesn't go that high, put it as high as it'll go. You'll want to have your pizza stone or your baking steel on the middle rack if you're using one of those, and then get some kind of metal pie pan or cake pan and place it on the lower rack of your oven. You'll preheat that along with the baking stone and then use that as a steam tray. To create steam in the oven, just heat up about a cup of water in a kettle. You'll pour the boiling water into your steam tray when it's time to bake. Once your doughs have proofed and risen by about 50%, it's time to transfer them onto your baguette peel and then score them and then bake them. And I will just be baking 2 of these at a time because that's the number that I can comfortably fit on my baking steel. If I try to bake 4 of them at once, they get overcrowded on the baking steel, so I just go 2 by 2. Dust your baguette peel or pizza peel or whatever you're using with a little bit of flour just to create a non-stick surface, and so the baguettes will easily slide off the peel and onto the baking stone. Then place the peel next to one of the baguettes and flip the baguette over onto the peel and gently remove the cloth, separating it from the dough. If you used flour properly, it should come off without sticking too badly. Give the baguette a few shakes to make sure it slides on the peel, and if it does, you're good to go. Roll the next baguette onto the peel if you can fit 2 of them at once. Dust off any excess flour from the tops of the baguettes, and now you're ready to score these and bake them. To score your baguettes, you'll need a razor blade or bread lame. I'll include a link to the lame that I use in the video description, but really any lame or razor blade will work. There's a million ways you could overanalyze the scoring, but I just do 3 lines on top of each baguette that are slightly overlapping, and I try not to make the lines too diagonal. Try to make them as straight as possible, because they'll open up in a diagonal fashion as the baguettes bake. So I just hold the razor blade at a shallow angle and score 3 lines, making sure they slightly overlap like this. That's about all there is to it. You could do more lines, you could do just 1 long score line. I'll show you a different option with the batch of baguettes that I bake after this. But for now, your baguettes are ready to bake, so go ahead and transfer them into your oven. Just like you would if you're sliding pizza onto a pizza stone, use your peel to slide the baguette off onto the baking steel or pizza stone. The good thing is, this is actually a lot easier than pizza because you're not dealing with any wet ingredients or sauce. Once you slide your baguettes into the oven, add a cup of boiling or very hot water into the metal baking tray that you have on the bottom rack. This will pretty much immediately start releasing steam into your oven, which will help the baguettes bake up nicely and get a bakery quality crust. Now bake your baguettes for 15 minutes at 500 degrees Fahrenheit with steam. Then after 15 minutes, remove the steam tray from the oven carefully and continue baking the baguettes at 500 degrees Fahrenheit for 5 to 10 more minutes depending on how dark you want them to be. If you want light brown baguettes, 5 more minutes. If you want them to be a little bit darker brown, maybe another 10 minutes in the oven. Once my baguettes had baked for an additional 5 minutes, they had a nice golden brown color that I was happy with, and I was ready to take them out. So slide your baguettes as carefully as you can onto a baking peel or some kind of pizza peel and transfer them onto a cooling rack to cool for at least 20 minutes before you slice into them. Now for the other 2 baguettes, I have no idea how this happened in the moment, but apparently I completely smashed one with my elbow. I really have no memory of that happening at all, but you win some, you lose some. I still had 1 more baguette to work with, so I decided to score that one with 1 long slash, and then transfer it to the oven, baked it off just like the other ones, and it came out like this. So after 20 minutes of rest time for these baguettes, it was time to give them the official taste test. Texture-wise, these baguettes had a really thin and crispy, crunchy crust on the outside. They're not quite as thin or as airy as my higher hydration ciabatta recipe, but these sourdough baguettes definitely feel light when you pick them up. For this particular baguette, I decided I wanted to make a sandwich, so I sliced it lengthwise and revealed a moderately open crumb, very soft and airy and a little bit fluffy on the inside. It might not be picture perfect or master baker level, but if you're going for perfection, you're probably never going to be happy. Just try to make some baguettes and enjoy the result that you get. For this other baguette, I decided to cut it into smaller pieces. This is exactly what I love to enjoy alongside a hearty soup or just to have with any kind of pasta or main dish. It's airy and light on the inside, but still hearty and crusty on the outside, so it can stand up to your main dish and soak up any type of sauce. For the sandwich, I decided to go French because baguettes are indeed French, and I made a classic jambon beurre or ham and butter sandwich. If you've never tried this sandwich, it's definitely worth giving a shot, especially if you've got high quality homemade baguettes lying around. It's a very simple sandwich that could arguably use a little bit of mustard or pickles, something for acidity, but France never asked me my opinion. They never do. These sourdough baguettes are crusty and hearty, but still light and airy on the inside. They're definitely many steps above any kind of cheap baguette that you can buy at a supermarket. If you want to get this recipe as well as the other recipes in my 52 Weeks of Sourdough series, check out the link down in the video description.